Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a closer look at the digital real estate of environments in Microsoft Dataverse. If you've been working within the Microsoft ecosystem for a while, you've definitely heard the term thrown around. But today, we're going to unpack exactly what it means, how it functions, and why it is literally the absolute foundation of your digital architecture. So, let's dive right in.
It sounds like a ridiculously simple question, doesn't it? But honestly, before you can safely build out your apps and flows, you really have to ask yourself where all of these digital assets physically exist, and more importantly, how they're kept secure. Because when you hit save on a new Power App or a Power Automate flow, it doesn't just float aimlessly out there in a digital void. It needs a home, it needs rigid boundaries, and it needs a very specific set of rules to govern who can see it and what data it's allowed to interact with. That's the core puzzle we're solving today. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the Dataverse environment defined. Second, security and tenant boundaries. Third, geography and physical locations. And fourth, structuring multiple environments. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the Dataverse environment defined. Think of an environment kind of like a highly secure, dedicated floor in a massive corporate office building. When you rent a floor in a building, you get to decide who actually has the key card to get off the elevator, right? You decide where the filing cabinets go and what kind of work is allowed to happen in those specific rooms. Well, in the Microsoft Power Platform, an environment is exactly that. It's a way to create and manage an instance of a Dataverse database. But it absolutely doesn't stop at just the data. It also manages user access, the overarching security settings, and the storage associated with that specific database.
So what exactly are we packing onto this corporate floor? Well, it's not just a giant room for your data. I mean, yes, you've got your Dataverse database, the user access permissions, security settings, and your storage allocation. But crucially, an environment also allows you to install the applications you're building with Power Apps or the flows you're creating with Power Automate. It's basically the ultimate all-encompassing container for your applications, your automations, and all the security wrapped around the whole shebang. Everything operates together within these very clearly defined walls.
Moving right along to Section 2, Security and Tenant Boundaries.
This is essentially your digital keep out sign. Every single environment you create is established under a Microsoft Entra ID tenant. Going back to our analogy, if the environment is a secure floor in the office building, the Microsoft Entra ID tenant is the entire office building itself, complete with a very strict, no-nonsense security guard checking IDs at the front door. The source documentation makes this rule crystal clear. Only users within that specific tenant can access the environment's resources. If you don't belong to the tenant, there is no way you're getting in. This is that foundational layer of security that guarantees your business data remains entirely isolated from the outside world.
Next up, Section 3, Geography and Physical Locations. You know, we throw around the term the cloud so much, it's really easy to forget that the cloud is, well, just a bunch of highly advanced physical computers sitting in a very real building somewhere on Earth. An environment is always bound to a specific geographic location, say the United States, or Europe, or Asia. When you create a Dataverse database in your environment, that database isn't just magically hovering in the air. It's physically created within data centers located in that precise geographic region you selected.
And here's what's actually super fascinating about this. Your database? It isn't the only thing tied down to that physical location. Any items you create in that environment are also bound to that environment's location. Your connections, your data gateways, and your flows using Power Automate, they are all geographically locked to that exact same region. This is absolutely vital to understand for compliance and performance reasons. Your processes and your data are physically operating in the exact same geographical neighborhood.
Finally, Section 4, Structuring Multiple Environments.
The good news here is that you aren't limited to just a single secure floor in our metaphorical building. Depending entirely on your needs, you can create one or you can create dozens of environments. This flexibility is what allows organizations to systematically manage their solution development and their data storage as they scale up. You definitely don't have to cram everything into one space.
This brings us to the ideal lifecycle strategy. You really want to create dedicated environments to manage how you build things. Think about it like this. You might set up one environment exclusively for development. This is your sandbox where you get to build new solutions and apps. Then, you set up another environment just for testing, where you can safely validate those changes without breaking anything important. And finally, you have a production environment for your live business use and your actual daily data storage. Separating your work like this keeps your live, mission-critical business data completely insulated from any experimental app building.
Or maybe your strategy is less about the dev lifecycle and more about the actual globe. You might strategically spin up environments based entirely on geography. For instance, you could set up one environment dedicated to your operations in Europe and a completely separate environment for your operations in Asia. This ensures that data generated in Europe stays physically in European data centers, and data generated in Asia stays in Asian data centers. It's a brilliant way to keep everything optimized for regional performance and strictly compliant with local data laws.
But amidst all this amazing flexibility, there is one unbending, absolutely hard-coded rule of this architecture, and that's 0 or 1. Each of these individual environments, whether it's for development, testing, Europe, or Asia, can have 0 or only one single instance of Microsoft Dataverse. You literally cannot spin up multiple Dataverse databases inside a single environment. It's a strict one-to-one relationship. If you need a second database, well, you're going to need to spin up a second environment.
So that brings us to the ultimate question. Now that you know the rules of the game, the strict tenant boundaries enforced by Entra ID, the physical geographic locks on your data, the lifecycle separation of dev, test, and production, and of course that critical one database rule, how are you going to architect your own environments? It's not just about building apps anymore. It's about building a highly secure, efficient, and logical foundation for those apps to actually thrive in. What's your blueprint going to look like?